Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and today I'm going to be talking about Dali speakers. This video has kind of been a long time coming because it's a long story, but I've had these for a few months. I've been kind of working them out in the living room and then my studio here for doing some more intimate listening sessions. It's a wonderful speaker, and the reason why I'm covering it is not because the brand reached out to me, it's because every year I go to an audio show called Axpona. It's an amazing hi-fi audiophile show. There's even a headphone exhibit there called Ear Gear, and when I heard the Dali speakers for the first time, I was pretty blown away. It was a standout to me. Of all the speakers I heard, I was really excited when I heard them. Now granted, the speaker I heard for the first time from Dali was the Core, which is their flagship. So that's kind of like saying I saw and heard a Ferrari and I liked it. It's kind of to be expected. But I was genuinely curious how much of that house sound, those core philosophies on tuning and design, what did that do to the trickle-down effect of their less expensive models? Because in the grand scheme of things, this may be on the higher end side for a lot of people, but it's a lot less expensive than their flagship. So the Opticon 6 Mark II, which is behind me to my left, those sell for $3,000 a pair at MSRP. And the center channel, which is called the Vokal Mark II, sells for $1,200. Now, the reason why I picked this particular lineup is because I wanted something that also tied into the aesthetics of the living room. It's not my only space. You know, my wife is living in the house, I have kids, and we have company that comes over, and you want certain spaces to look at a certain level. I didn't want it to look like I just threw all of my gear out there in the living room. So the Opticon was nice because it's available in a satin white. It's available in two other colors as well. And sadly, when you go to the Opticon 8 Mark II, which is the 8-inch dual driver system instead of the 6.5, it's not available in white. It's only available in the other two colors. Now, those sell for about $5,000 a pair, and they also have some bookshelves that are less money, I think down to about $1,200 for a pair. And they even have an LCR system, which is a wider, taller cabinet on for a bookshelf, comparatively speaking, but it's only 5 inches deep. So if you want to do an on-wall solution, you can always get those in addition to something like these larger speakers up front. And that takes me into another reason why I decided to cover these Dali speakers. One, I was hoping it would sound like what I heard as far as the house sound goes, obviously within reason, but Dali is doing something that a lot of hi-fi companies don't do, and that is they make a center speaker. There are some incredible speakers out there, and from a lot of the audiophile brands, they're usually just a left and right, and I'm not taking anything away from that because being more of an audiophile type person, I guess, not to put myself in a box, I understand the approach of having just two awesome speakers, whether it's a bookshelf or a tower. However, in the living room applications, I didn't want just two amazing towers, and then what do you do for the center? How do you match a center to two incredible towers? So there are brands out there that make good stuff. I've heard stuff from SVS with good surround sound components and everything. But I liked Dali for this particular setup because it had the aesthetic that I wanted for the living room, being white with these gray cloth grills. It fits in really nice. And then now I have a center speaker that's tonally matched to my towers. And in this particular case, it's the exact same driver. Both of these use the 6.5-inch driver, and then it has a hybrid tweeter system. Now, I want to talk about the tweeter system, but to show you, I want to remove this grill because this is another slick thing I like about the Dali speakers. The little prongs, if you will, that stick out on the grill actually go into the mount for the drivers themselves, so there's no extra hole and grommet system. Some speaker brands, you will have like a little grommet, and that's fine. So a lot of people that, take the grills off, you just kind of deal with seeing the holes there. Some other companies will use a magnet system and they kind of snap in place. Depending on the finish, I've actually had some issues with the magnet systems because they can slide around and kind of mar the finish a little bit, so you have to be really careful. This has a rubber foot, so it kind of sits flush against the cabinet here, and then these little prongs, if you will, stick out to insert, and that's rubber lined, so there's no like rattling or anything like that. Now, the tweeter system is another thing that caught my eye with the Opticon series because it's a hybrid tweeter. You have a silk dome tweeter and a ribbon tweeter, and I've used ribbons, I've used AMTs, like all of these tweeter technologies, if you will, which have unique properties, and it can be a little concerning when you see a dual tweeter system. Does that mean it's just twice the amount of treble? And it's not, obviously, but In this case, it's voiced to do different things. You know, the ribbon tweeter is handling very high frequencies over 10,000 hertz, whereas the silk dome tweeter is handling some of the lower treble to help blend in with that wood fiber driver. Now, on the note of the center speaker, again, it's $1,200. The other thing that I liked about this model is the ports are on the front. A lot of larger center speakers put the ports on the rear, and that typically is going to give you really good performance, but you have to move the center speaker off the wall enough to where that's not causing bass bloom or actually negatively impacting your sound quality. That's why on big floor standing speakers, if they're rear ported, which the towers are, there's 2 ports that float in the back center of the cabinet. With this being a front port, you're not confined or stuck placing the center in a certain way. Most people's TV stands are anywhere from like 14 to 21 inches deep. This will fit perfectly fine on there, but now if it's, you know, you don't have a lot of depth to work with, because these ports are up front, you don't have to worry as much about the impact of the wall being right behind the cabinet. Now, one thing that can be a little bit jarring to get over for some people who are used to, like, you know, huge center speakers and a more traditional center speaker, a lot of center channels use a dual driver. It's called MTM, let's just say mid tweeter mid. And there are numerous examples online of that being a problem, acoustically speaking, because when you have the dual drivers on the outside and then the tweeter in the center, because of the way sound waves work, a lot of times they actually cancel each other out in certain areas, and you create nulls and inconsistencies in your listening experience. So if you're in the primary listening position, it might not even sound as good as it possibly can because the drivers are almost working against each other. So while I would have loved to see a physically wider center speaker to kind of match the aesthetic of having a nice big grand entertainment system, this was intentional, and I assume that it's to combat some of those issues that you commonly find with MTM systems. So this is going to essentially perfectly match the tonality of the towers and the larger bookshelves to an extent. And this is the only center they make of the series. So even if you got the dual 8s, this will be the center that you would pair with that. The Opticon series uses an MDF enclosure. It's not like super inert, but keep in mind this is their more, I guess, I don't want to say entry level because that kind of puts a bad taste in your mouth. It's really not an entry level speaker where you compare it to actual entry level stuff out there, but it's not their highest end enclosures. When you go into their more expensive line and you do the knock test, it's going to be much more heavy and inert, which does help with sound quality, but it also significantly increases price. So the center speaker is actually quite light. It's just about 20 pounds. And then the towers, the Opticon 6 Mark IIs, are about 42 pounds. So it is pretty easy to handle and move around. Specs and power handling are quite similar as well. The center channel goes down to just over 40 hertz. And even though this is rated at a higher frequency, closer to 40 hertz for the tower, I was easily getting 30 hertz once it was in my room. The effects of room gain and using walls to amplify bass actually helps a lot with tower speakers, depending on how they're placed. But these are all 4 ohm. And in my case, for these 2 sets, they are 88 decibel sensitivity. So 4 ohm helps. It makes it quite loud because you get more amp power. But keep that in mind, because if your amplifier is not rated for 4 ohms and you turn it up, you have a chance of damaging your amplifier. So make sure you pair it with the right equipment. 88 decibels isn't the most sensitive out there, but if you're directly comparing to an 8 ohm speaker that's slightly more sensitive, this still might come across as louder to you. Either way, they're still really relatively easy to drive. I was using a Denon AVR X4700H for the surround sound processing, and then in this room, when I was just doing listening tests, I was using the PS Audio Stellar Strata. So I wasn't going like super hardcore with the amp power, and they got crazy loud. Now lastly, these speakers are made in Denmark and they come with a 5-year warranty. There's a lot of places you can buy these, so shop around. I know Crutchfield is a dealer, and I know there are a bunch of other, you know, more boutique shops throughout the country if you're in the United States. Or if you're in Europe, you know, again, same thing applies. Shop around, find a reputable place. And if you can, give them a listen. If you're able to go to Axpona, definitely check out the Dali room so you can hear the house sound. So speaking of sound, let's get into it. So I'm going to start with something super simple and summarize the Opticon as much as I can, and they are like the vocal kings. And this is a standout feature to me because there's a lot of magic that happens with the Opticon series that somehow brings vocals forward into the mix, like noticeably more than a lot of speakers I have, yet it's not doing it in a way that's coloring them in some negative way. It doesn't sound piercing, it doesn't sound nasally or sharp. Somehow, it's like the whole track or movie was remixed to make dialogue slightly stronger. That is an insane feat. It's really a standout benefit and pro to this speaker, and what I think more people will enjoy if you're doing a lot of A/B testing. It's how well pronounced vocals are. Now, when I compared it to my T+A Carusos, the S10s, which I purchased after doing that review, or at least during that process of the Caruso amp, I did a lot of A/Bing against the Carusos because they're similarly priced. You know, when you look at the S10 versus the Opticon 6 Mark II, they both sell for about the same MSRP, at least when the Caruso was selling actively. And they have a wildly different sound presentation. Not so much where one is like drastically better than the other, but there's a noticeable change in the way music's presented. One of the things I noticed when I compared the Caruso to the Opticon is the Caruso had a little bit more emphasis on sub bass, only because the mid bass doesn't seem as strong as the Opticon. The Opticon has a much more punchy, lively mid bass, not boosted above reference, but I actually think it's because the Caruso is recessed slightly in that bass area. If I had to explain the Caruso, it's almost like you have a bookshelf speaker paired with a well-matched subwoofer. There seems to be a little bit of separation between a lot of the music that I like to hear and a lot of the details and presentation, and then it doesn't have as much body and heft to the mid bass, and then you have a really nice strong sub bass fill. Compared to the Opticons are much more linear. And when I listen to a song that only has sub bass, like something that's hitting 60 hertz and below the entire time, they sound very similar to the Caruso. They have the same bass prowess and capability in bass handling. The difference just shifts when you start listening to rock, when you start listening to something that has more of a plucky bass sensation. If you're listening to a bass guitar, the difference is pretty profound, and I really like the way that the Opticons present that. Now, I already talked about the mids briefly, and I don't really have any faults with this. There's only a couple songs where the very forward mid-range can be a little too much for me. The song Uninvited by Alanis Morissette, it sounded good, but when I heard it on the Caruso made it sound more like a live performance, and because her voice was kind of pulled back just a little bit, it was a little bit easier to listen to. So if you have a track that's mixed where the voice is a dominant part of the mix, it might be a little too strong, but that's just me finding one of the very few criticisms I have, because when you get into the treble presentation, this is where I thought I was going to have some issues with the whole dual tweeter system. This is like the best treble implementation I've heard so far of all of the speakers I've ever reviewed, because you have this dual separation of tweeters and the way it's crossed over into the mid-range. It's so effortless, it's so clean. There's no real breakup. I mean, I haven't found a listening volume where I was getting like too uncomfortable to really push the tweeters, or in a way that I felt like it wasn't able to keep up with, microdynamics during a busy song. So even on a really loud, complex scene, I felt like this was keeping up absolutely fine. It has a really good balance of resolution and detail without being sharp or sibilant. It's actually smoother than my Caruso S10s, which I didn't find sibilant either. So this is a really nice presentation on the treble. Now, with the way this is tuned, when you compare it, and I'm using the Caruso a lot because it helps kind of paint a picture because they are kind of different. I did compare it to some others, but when you listen to imaging and soundstage, if you will, of the speakers and how wide or focused they are, these have a much more direct, very precise imaging presentation. You really want to place your speakers in a really good spot where they're towed in just right, equal distance to your seating position, etc., because you want to make the most out of your investment. And this has the ability to very clearly delineate exactly where the source of the audio cue should be coming from. If it's slightly left, it is right there, and you know exactly where it's coming from. On the Caruso, it's a little bit less coherent. Part of what makes it sound a little bit more live and stagey is because you lose some of the preciseness in the imaging. I still like the Caruso. Again, I purchased it, but the way those are is everything sounds like the room is a little bigger, the speakers are a little bit further away, and you lose a little bit of that intimacy because of that. Whereas this has a really good balance of sounding wide, sounding filled in. The tweeter dispersion on this is very wide as well. I was nervous about using the ribbon tweeter because they typically don't when they're throwing out higher frequencies, it can be more directional. So if you're off axis, it can usually hurt performance. It's blended nicely where you don't really notice it much, and you have a pretty wide listening area. So even if you're getting this set up for, a really wide couch for a lot of family members, I don't feel like one area is going to be drastically better than the other. I'm not sure how many people are Massive Attack fans out there, or Portishead, that type of thing. But there's a song called Splitting the Atom from Massive Attack, and that really shows the importance of having good bass depth with good mid-bass tactility, because that blew me away when I heard them on these speakers. And then when you factor in all the layering that Massive Attack is known for, and the imaging and the soundscapes, if you will, it was a remarkable listen. It's the best I've ever heard that song in my home, and I could very much understand and see what they're targeting with the house sound. Now, I also have an older set of Martin Logan floor standards that I've loved in the past. I think the bass dynamics and depth of that is pretty profound for the price. But what I noticed is with the AMT and the voicing of those speakers, it has a really narrow notch at like the 1 to 2K area, almost like you're taking a seashell and holding it to your ear, or like a plastic cup or cup in your ears. It changes and really narrowly focuses that spot, and it kind of creates a jarring effect. And I didn't notice how strong that peak was until I heard the Dali speakers, because the T+A Caruso is just a different presentation. It's more relaxed. It's where it's more relaxed in the 4K area. The Dali speakers come forward a little bit, so they come across as slightly more detailed and direct, like I said before. But what was interesting is when you compare it to the Martin Logans, the Dali has a similar forwardness in the mid-range without that nasally pinched, really odd sensation that has like a sharp, narrow presentation. And that kind of brings me back to the beginning of the sound part, where I was talking about how they magically put voices forward without coloring in a bad way. It's never like a wince-worthy sound cue. This is also hugely important for movies. I'm sure a lot of us out there have watched tons of movies that the dialogue is really weak, and then all the explosions and stuff happen, and then you're turning it down and you're putting it in night mode and losing your dynamic range. These are the type of speakers, if that's been driving you crazy, these are the type of speakers you want, because the vocal lift that they get is so good in movie playback. And then you still have the good bass depth, you have the insane imaging performance, you have a matching center, so it doesn't go Pinto Ferrari when a car is driving across the screen. You have the bookshelves of various sizes, and then they even have the on-wall speakers if you want to stay with the entire series. They do in-walls and in-ceilings as well, but I want to stick with just the Opticons and not go too far off in a tangent. So I was really happy with the way they perform naturally with movies. I think if a speaker is exceptional in music, it's going to be great in movies, but there is a benefit from having a speaker that's just a tad more mid-forward, because it really helps with dialogue. And that about covers the review. Speakers are something I'm leaning more into for future stuff in the channel. I'm not going to exclude gaming stuff. I still play games, and this is still great for games too, but I'm going to do a mix of different things and formats. So if you like what you see, great. If there are things I could do better as far as how you want speakers to be reviewed, maybe there's extra information I didn't cover that would help improve future coverage, shoot a comment below. I'm always trying to do a better job at the channel and giving you the information you're looking for. In summary, I sought out getting the Dali speakers at my home because I loved what I heard at the flagship level, and this did not let me down in any way. I absolutely love this sound, and I think the more people that get their hands on Dali and start talking about it, they're just going to get more popular in the US. I've had Martin Logans, I have Kef, I have Bowers and Wilkins all here at the house, and this is the best balance of everything I'm looking for in a speaker. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to see you at the next video. And if you're going to Axpona, keep an eye out for me. Come over and say hi. I'd love to meet in person. Thanks again. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.